I will tell. Yes, I will tell the story. As I left off, the last time I shared was I brought us to the time I gave my heart to him. And it wasn't with a prayer of, oh, I give my heart to you. I know you're God. It was, I don't believe in you. But if you're real. And he made himself so real to me that I could not believe that I had never believed in him and didn't know him. And he's always been there. But after I did that, I came back and for a few weeks, I went back and forth to this church. My dad said, well, it's good you're getting out, Verrie, because remember, I was in a wheelchair. And a friend of mine wheeled me forward and they prayed for me. And he said, God said, in spite of the fact that I'm trying to remember what it is. Oh, okay. I was laughing at him. In spite of the fact you're laughing at me, and I was doing it under my breath because I didn't believe God would heal me. I told John, and I didn't do that. And he said, God said, in spite of the fact you're doing that, he's going to heal you. And they tried to get me out of the wheelchair. I couldn't walk. It just was not time. Maybe if I'd believed him, maybe it would have been time. But in March 11th, 1972, 71, March 11th, 1971, time gets, confused. I have to straighten it out all the time.
I'm with you. I know what you mean.
Oh, I tell you. Anyway, they were having a big baptism. Brother Boswell, the pastor of this church, decided to do it out in the lake on that March in California, Sacramento, California. And so we went out to Folsom Lake. It's very cold there in March. And I didn't have a towel. And I felt God said, get baptized. So I went down the water with them and they baptized me. And I came up with my arms up in the air, praising God. And then I was helped back in my wheelchair and all that. And they took me home. Family dropped me off. And I noticed something on the lawn. It was all my clothes. I never told my family because they were anti-God, anti-Christian anyway. Mm-hmm. And I never told my family what was happening, but my clothes are spread across the lawn. I tried to go to the door to find out and it was locked. I couldn't get in at all. All the money I had to my name, all my belongings, that is the clothing, were sopping wet. And I'm sitting there going, what do I do? I tried to pick up some of the ones, but they were just sopping. I was trying to wring them out. And a car pulled up with two young men in it. And they said, Verrie, you need help. They loaded up all my belongings that were on the lawn. And I went with them to their house and they had an extra bedroom. They were brothers in the Lord, but not brothers. So here I am with them. And they said, listen, this is a couple days later after I'd gotten situated, my clothes had been dried and I could put something on. By the way, I was really cold from that lake and I was in wet clothes anyway. But they said, we're going to pick a man up. You sit in the back seat with him. You're going to learn something about the power of God. And I sat there in that back seat and they got him in the car and then they pulled over and started praying for him, commanding demons to flee. I listened to this young man's voice change and he started speaking in many different voices. I felt as something came out of him, attack me, and it couldn't get in, but it scared the living daylights out of me. And I had just gotten back from a war.
Yeah.
From then on, I was scared to death. It was nighttime. I was scared to death of the dark. Really crazy because I was frightened of the enemy. And so from then on, I slept with the light on. Whatever I did, the light had to be on. I wouldn't go into an abandoned building or anything else. I was scared of what I'd seen. I'd seen God, now I'd seen the enemy. God put me in a crash course. He had a lady walk up to me and she walked past me, turned around and walked back. God spoke to me. I said, okay. He said to tell you he's the God of the night as well as the day. So I got reproved repeatedly.
There you go.
One day he turned around and he said, you will go into that building. It was an abandoned building. People said it was haunted. I went into it in the center of the building and I prayed. And I was shaking. Oh, I was shaking. But my fear of the dark began to recede. And my knowledge of the enemy began to the point that now I can actually at times see them and I rebuke them. When we were traveling one time, my wife and my grandma had us, the only time my folks allowed me back, and I'll get into that, was as a hired hand, except for once. But we went and saw my grandma June, and all the people in her boarding house said that something goes bump in the night. They had seen ghosts. They were scared to death. So we slept in the same bed that my granddad had died in. And I still remember being at his bedside when he died and him screaming, "Oh my God, the fire." My granddad believed in the Ouija board and the power therein, and it would move on its own. So we slept in that bed, and in the middle of the night, I felt like I was being choked. There was this dark shadow around my neck. We turned the light on and it didn't disperse the shadow. Well, we rebuked it, took a lot of rebuking, Bethany and I, and that thing disappeared. The next morning I looked under the bed and my granddad's Ouija board was under my side of the bed. So I prayed and bound that demon into that Ouija board. And then Bethany and I prayed for a place, because my grandmother, June, would never allow us to get rid of anything of her husband's. And God showed us a crack in the wall leading into the closet. We put it in the wall, bound in that wall. We came back 6 months later. The same people were there and they said, "It's been so peaceful and quiet since you guys left. What did you do?"
She also, one of the things she changed, she always had a rotation of borders,
Yeah, they would come and go because they were scared to death of the
noises. And
the noises.
Yeah.
So I told her about the Ouija board and told her what we had done. She said, "Crack in the wall?" There's no crack in the wall. We walked back in the closet and there was no crack in the wall.
Wow.
But we know what we did. We both witnessed to it. But we went from that point, as I said, I lived with those people. And I went to a place in Lebanon, Missouri, where God told me to go. I had raised $35 for a Greyhound bus to the middle of Houston in the bus stop. And I had an address turned out to be in the north, I think it was the northwest side of the city. I took all day to get there. I had no money for food, got there, and they were eating a feast because their pastor was going up north to this, where they'd moved their school. I was going to a school. Yes, God was putting me through the classes, but the enemy was alive and real. So I went all the way there. They fed me and I was allowed to go with them. I sat in almost a semi truck, open door on the side, and a rocking chair. That was the only way I could ride because there's no room in the cab. I had no money for food. So after the second day, they asked me, "Why aren't you eating?" I said, "I have no money to buy food." So they fed me. We got to Lebanon, Missouri, and God took me there. They forced me to talk about my war experiences because I'd wake up screaming in the night. This is, it's just being a soldier. But anyway, so they forced me to talk about it. They put a young man in front of me and over me that they thought they could trust. His name was Les Buford. I still remember the name. I was supposed to do whatever he said. Okay. And I realized from the beginning he was jealous and he hated me. Satan always has his people somewhere. And so he began to attack me. I had a job that was good. He got me another job. I could turn around with this big gun and put staples in on mattress springs and Justice Furniture in Lebanon, Missouri. And one day, Les and I walked out. I was living in a nightmare in hell as the enemy used this young man to attack me. He had just told me that he didn't like the way I breathed and I needed to change the way I breathed.
We breathed.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the enemy for you. So we're out on this park bench where we ate our lunch.
Oh my word.
And we laid down the park bench and I went to sleep And I guess he did too, because I couldn't be out of his sight according to the rules. And suddenly I heard this loud thunder in the sky. It had been a bright, sunny day. There was not a cloud when I opened my eyes, but I heard something. And it was trust and obey. Les spoke before I could say a word, so I kept it to myself. And he said, you know, there's not a cloud in the sky. And I heard thunder, and I could have sworn it was a voice, but I couldn't make it out. So went back to Lebanon, Missouri, and continued my time there preaching. They put me preaching in a church. I didn't want to preach. I was shy. I couldn't stand in front of people, yet they made me. So I started preaching to ducks and chickens. There were ducks in this pond and there were chickens all around. And I'd preach to them and they would follow me wherever I went. Now, these are wild ducks, and the chickens they'd hired, bought them, but they didn't have a pen, so they ran free in the property out there in the country. One day they came up to me and they said to me, listen, we're going to have a big group of people here, and we got about 20 chickens out there. We can't get close to them to catch them. Would you preach at them so that we can get them and kill them? And I refused to do it. They had to shoot them all. But I did preach and began to preach then. They were my audience to start with, and God led me. But from there, I went back to Sacramento, to the brother's house. And I still remember Doug, can't think of his last name, but Doug, it was getting things together in my life and that. And this gentleman painted a helmet for me. And I rode in a Christian motorcycle gang later, not gang, club would be a better word for it. But on my helmet was a hand with blood running down, and cars would hit their horn and then stop us and see, how did you do that? There's blood running from the hand, and we could witness to him. So I was there, and that's where one day I was walking across the field. This is about 3 years after I was prayed for. I was walking across the field, and this was my second college, and my knee on my left side snapped, and the leg kept moving back and forth of its own control. I had no control over it. When I heard the snap, I screamed. It was painful, and it kept moving. And I looked at it, and it looked just like the other leg. And I thought, there's something wrong here. So I put it down slowly to the ground, stood on it, hopped up and down on it. You saw me hopping and down the other day. Put my crutches that I worked up to on my shoulder, went back to the school. And, well, the dean of students saw me and decided to call a special day. And all the students celebrated the fact that I got healed. Now, this was a Southern Baptist school called California Southern Baptist College. It's now called Southern Baptist University or something like that. And they put me in charge of the Friday club. Okay, so I would be having in the evenings a worship service with all the students. They're all required to attend. And then I would take those that would go with me, and we'd go in the heart of Los Angeles and testify, okay, to people. And I remember walking down the road one day and I saw this car, right? And so I walked up, knocked on the window of the car, and I told the man I wanted to tell him about Jesus. He looked at me, he says, I don't want to hear it. He said, well, I'm going to tell you anyway. So he let me get in. He had a gun in his lap. He pointed it at me. He says, I just killed somebody and I'm going to kill you too. So I didn't know what else to do. So I told him about the Lord. After a while, he kicked me out of his car and said, get out of here. And so I went on my merry way, you know, and God blessed me in that college because he gave me an intense desire. I read the word. I used to keep track of how many times I read from Genesis to Revelations. I quit counting at 400 times. I studied it in Greek, in Latin, in Hebrew. I was just, what can I say, just hungry for knowledge about the person I had met. Because I knew he was real. And I led these people out every week. Now, about Christmas time, God dealt with my parents. My parents called me up and said, we'd like you to come home for Christmas. Now, they'd kicked me out and locked me out. And I didn't want to go there, but I had a friend of mine that I'd met in a coffee shop. He was sitting and he was so angry at white people and that. And I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? He says, you people are all racist. All you do is cut us blacks down. And I looked at him and said, oh, don't tell me people cut you down. I bet you people have been more racist to me than they ever were to you. I used to have fire engine red hair. And I say, have you ever been told that your head's on fire? I'd rather be dead than red. I said, all the days of my life, I've been told that. He looked at me and we started playing a game of Risk. He would take the black, I would take the red. And so we would play and have fun with that game of Risk. He became one of my best friends in college and in that Christian college. And that Christian college, I went there because you have to understand, I flunked high school, but the military provided a tutor. And one of my teachers, Dr. Dana, decided that she was going to teach me English. I could speak few other languages, but I didn't speak English very well or write it or read it or whatever. And so she did. I got one of my degrees is in English. But in my Western literature class, I wrote a short story on the church back then, what I observed. It was called A Gunfight in Dead Man's Gulch. And the story is told by the man that lost the gunfight. The teacher, I handed it in. I did this in half an hour, sitting laughing through the whole thing. The teacher read it, said, I've never given an A in my life and been teaching about 20 years. And you got my first A.
Neat.
And he made me read it. I was still shy, but he made me read it to all the students in all his classes. I hated that. But I still have a copy of it at home. And during that same time, I also took one of the translations, tore it apart, and sent the information. And I have from the publishing committee, not publishing committee, the translating committee, I have a copy of a statement. You're right. We will change it down the road and fix the errors we made. So God did a lot of things with me in that school. And at Christmas time, anyway, I got that call about Christmas time, and Dave went home with me. Okay. He said, well, you need to go home and be with your parents. And he said, I don't have any. So I went home. He went home with me. And he said, but I have a girlfriend that lives in Livermore. I want to go see her. So 4 a.m. in the morning, he dragged me out of bed and said, we're going to Livermore. And I'm going, what? So we went to Livermore, California, and he talked to his girlfriend, and they had arranged a date for me. Now, there was this young lady that got in the car, and her name was Bethany.
How cool.
Oh, yes. And so we met on a blind date. And I told her, like two ships passing the night, we moved each other's course a little, and I left. Well, Bethany wants to tell you what she thought about me at that time.
Cool.
Not coming. So, there I am. When I first met him, I got in the car and we're talking, the old car that has the bench seat. And so I'm sitting next to the passenger's side, and he looks at me and he goes, I hope you're not going to sit against that door the whole time. I'm going, okay. Well, we went to San Francisco for the afternoon and early evening. And we, going in and out of the car and stuff, Sue and Dave in the back seat said they could slowly see me kind of moving. Each time we got in, I was moving closer and closer to him.
A little more closer.
By the time we were heading home, I was sitting right next to him. And when they dropped me off, and he did give me a kiss goodbye. and, to talk the whole thing, ships passing in the night and all this other stuff. But we did exchange, no, we did, at that time, we didn't exchange addresses at that.
Or
point in
phone
time,
numbers.
Or phone numbers or anything like that. But I walked back into the house, went into the bedroom, closed the door, and I just said, that's the man I'm going to marry. I just knew it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. I just knew it.
I tried to get her to see a psychiatrist, but she wouldn't listen to me. Anyway, that's not true. But so we've been married now for 45 years?
Yep.
45 years. Okay. I have to think, my brain doesn't remember these things, but 45 years. Now, Bethany and I began a journey there, and we lived in a house, little house off campus. We left after we got married. We left Livermore because there was a few, 6 months later we got married, Bethany? 5 months later. I miss times, And so we traveled back. Now, I was getting VA money to go to school because I was disabled and all that. And so they paid for my schooling. And I'd left a notice that I'd be back. I came back and looked for my check to pay the rent on the place. My check was missing. I asked the girl that was there, she was a temporary, she said, oh, I didn't know what you did. So I wrote on the check, returned to the government and said, moved, left no forwarding address. So we didn't have the check. I went to my landlady.
Oh, no.
Yes. Went to my landlady, and my landlady said, listen, I know you. You're a good friend of my son, Caesar, and he knows you're a good, godly man, and I can trust you. So she said, don't worry about it, and that you're fine. So we didn't get a check. I called the VA, and the VA, I had to argue with them, and they said they'd get a check the next month, 30 days later to me. Double check. And I could finally pay my landlord. It was only $100 a month back then, for a house now that'd be, I don't know, more than 1,000.
Yeah.
But we were there, and we'd go out and walk at night. And across the street from where we lived was a Black community. We were in the Mexican community. Now, on the doors of the houses were written numbers, and that was a number that had died from the different gangs of the two community coming together. So as we were walking, we'd make a phone call to her mother, and it never failed. Somebody'd come run up, either one of the Black guys or one of the Mexican guys, and they beg us to let them hide on the floor of the phone booth as the gangs chased him. And so we did. We were left alone as the token whites of the whole neighborhood. We were left alone. God did that for us. Okay. And because I could ride I had the motorcycle at the time and all that bit. And Bethany remembers my helmet. We finally got rid of it. I had a bicycle then, and I rode to the grocery store one day. What was that?
It was my bicycle.
It was Bethany's bicycle. And as I was going down the grocery store, I heard a car squealing, speeding, coming around a turn, and it was coming right at me. I heard a scream of my name out loud. And I looked, I'm standing on the cement with the bicycle, holding it up, and the car squealing its brakes. And the guy got out because he said, and looking, and I walked out to him and he said, I hit you. I know I hit you. How are you over there? God continued to work miracles. We left school and went to Fresno, California. And you have to understand, the enemy was continuously attacking. We don't live. If we are serving God, we are going to be attacked. Need to bring this one story in before I move farther. I went to a convalescent home. Remember the young lady, Jan? I don't know if you do. What was it, Lila?
Lila, I think it was.
Anyway, she was in New York, there in the community, and she was dying from cancer. And we used to take her to that restaurant we took you to one time, Chinese food.
Uh-huh.
Well, anyway, the lady was in the convalescent home. They would wheel all these people in, and one of the ministries I had was to preach to them. So they brought the people in. This woman had a claw. Her hand was like a claw, and if it clamped on you, oh my goodness, you couldn't hardly pry it off, and it hurt to high heavens. She did it to me. One time she did it to me, one time too many, and I rebuked the spirit and commanded it to flee and prayed for God to restore her. Well, I came back the next weekend to preach again, and all the nurses are saying, wow, that was a great miracle. And I'm going, what are you talking about? Well, it seems that that young lady whose head was always hanging over and spittle was running out of her mouth, returned to sanity and was able to get out of her wheelchair and no longer had the claw.
Wow, that is awesome.
A child bound by Satan all these years. But we moved to Fresno, California.
Yeah.
And we were in Fresno and attending churches. And I still remember we were being told that white lies were acceptable. If your boss tells you that, you know, he's not there or something else, well, you lie for him and say he's not there. That's all right in God's eyes, we were told. And I rebuked him. They really got angry at me. And that we told them, no, they're not all right. But during that time, I was hired by a company to work called Safeco Title. And Safeco had wanted to set up a branch in Tacoma, Washington, and they wanted me to set it up. So I flew up there and then I came back. Now, as we came back into San Francisco from Seattle, Washington, the flight, the plane lost power and got it again and landed. Well, about 3 or 4 hours later, they got it fixed and we flew to Fresno. Now, as you're coming in Fresno, Bethany was at the airport. And come here.
Okay.
I'm going to make her share this a little bit. That's what I'm doing is I'm bringing out, there's a lot more stories than this.
Oh, okay, Daniel, thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. So I'm at the airport in Fresno. That was back when you could actually stand at the gate and
Yeah, wait for your friends. or husband.
And so the attendants had opened up the door, and as we're waiting for the flight to arrive, and suddenly they closed the door, and everybody's going, "What's going on? What happened?" You know, type thing. And so they announced that, "I'm sorry, the flight, you know, such and such, has been canceled." It was because people were going to get on and continue on elsewhere, and it was kind of like, where's my husband? I know he got on the flight. Where's my husband? Type thing. And so I went home and called the airline and found out that it had mechanical or electrical problems, and they were going to fly down to Los Angeles to the longest runway
In the world
In the
at that
world.
time.
and it ended in the on a beach. Is
In the ocean.
So it was right there. It would end on the beach, and so on, because it was the longest. And I was just kind of like, "Where's my husband? Where's my, what's going on and stuff."
Now I'm going to
So-
take over. Now I'm on this plane and I'm reading my Bible, Jen. And as I'm reading my Bible, people are freaking out, yelling, screaming, because the stewardess came out and said after we had a power failure again. And this is, we're coming into Fresno and we dropped 300 or 400 feet in the air, just bam. And then they were managed to get us going again. But the pilot found out he couldn't get the wheels down.
Couldn't get the flaps to do anything.
No, the flaps wouldn't go down, the wheels wouldn't go down. And so the stewardess turned around and started screaming, "We're going to die."
Oh my God, we're gonna die,
And people were screaming on the
Flight attendant does it. Oh,
oh yeah, everybody was going nuts. And people were looking at me and somebody turned around to me, "What's wrong with you, man? We're going to die." I said, "No, we're not." So I stood up and somehow God gave me the gift. I got control of the people and I said to them, "Listen, God told me this. If you sit down and you relax, not one of you are going to die. You'll be fine. We're going to land in Los Angeles." This is before the pilot came on and told us we're going to Los Angeles. We were out circling over the ocean because he said he was going to set us in the water. And I know enough to know they sink like a rock. So I figured, well, we might get out, might not.
Yeah.
But I said, we're going to the longest runway in the world. We're going to be in Los Angeles. We're going to crash on that runway. I said, we will survive. Now sit down and be calm. God above has given me all your lives. You'll be fine. And I went back to reading my Bible. People began to calm down and sat down, looking at me weirdly. Then the pilot comes on and says, listen, I've been given permission. We were trying to empty all the fuel so that when we dropped into the water, we wouldn't blow up. He said, but now they're going to have us fly to Los Angeles. They think we have enough left to actually get there. And maybe it'd just be fumes when we land, he said. Like kind of the way he said it, I can't even try to emphasize it. But we went down to Los Angeles. We came straight in. The belly hit. We went sideways for a while. We turned and sideways back and forth. That pilot should have gotten a medal. He got us down there. The plane went all the way into the water. And I know that because they put a slide out and we slid down it and it broke open.
The plane.
The plane actually was broken in two. And but nobody, there were bruises, but nobody was seriously hurt. Now, God gave me those people, but you notice the enemy tried to do what, Jan? Take our lives.
I'm sorry. Oh, yeah.
The enemy in every one of the stories I've showed you so far tries to do harm, right? Tried to take my life, yet he was cast out because it was in school being taught by God to the point that I could turn around and look him in the eye and not be scared to death of him. Okay.
Yeah.
So went back, set up that office, and God spoke to us about going back, reminded me that he called me to do something in the mission field. So we decided to go on a missionary trip journey. One of our many journeys was to Mexico. Remember, I lived in a Mexican community. So we went to
Right, yeah.
Mexico, into the mountains. Now in the Mexico, we drove up this mountain. I'm running out of time. I'll have to be quick. We drove up this mountain to this mountain village. They had requested someone come and preach to them because they couldn't afford to pay the $50 equivalent of US money to the Catholic Church. So nobody came that year. They were very poor. They'd had some problems. And so we went up there and we sat there and they sang and Father Abraham and that, and the whole building's moving. And they're
It was
packed like
packed
sardines.
with people.
The only place that was open was in the front. And I kept thinking in my mind, oh, how I'd love to be up there, you know, where I could breathe, because after being buried alive in Nebraska, I have a paranoia about tight places. So they got done finally, and they said, pointed to me and said, you're going to speak. And I went, I haven't prepared anything. I'm not to speak. But I spoke what came to me, and the interpreter said, you know, I've never had someone speak slowly enough and stopping soon enough. I was stopping to get an idea what God wanted me to say, that I could actually interpret it well. And he thanked me profusely, and all the people lined up, and I was told to pray for him. And I said, well, you guys pray for him. And they said, oh, no, you preach, you pray. Well, what I didn't know was the first lady I prayed for, I said, Lord, and I still remember this, you know what this dear sister needs. And that's all I prayed. Now, went through everybody, praying for everybody. I was exhausted saying the words and that over and that. And I don't know, it didn't mean much to me in the sense that it was just a prayer. You have to understand this. And I don't have any supernatural powers or that. So I prayed for him. Now I went out and I'd had to go to the bathroom by the time we got there. And so I'd asked, and they told me, well, showed me a corral, and all the young kids, girls and boys, got in the fence to watch the gringo go to the bathroom. So I couldn't do that. I just couldn't do it in front of
They
them.
didn't have any outhouses or anything
Yes.
like that. There was no electricity in this.
So I got in the
Village,
Jeep
nothing.
that we'd ridden up in and waiting for everybody to come in. All these people were roaring and celebrating. They're having a party. And I said, can we go? They said, oh, no, we must celebrate the great miracle. And I'm going, what miracle? what seems the first lady I prayed for had an abscessed tooth and rotted away. And so part of the bone of the, I guess from what I understood was the jaw was showing, and she was in extreme agony. God instantly healed her.
No idea.
So for me, the greatest miracle was the fact that I didn't have to go to the bathroom until we got down the mountain. But anyway, God took us
I
down.
hear you, I've been there.
Oh yeah. And down the mountain, we got to where the church was, a little Mexican church. And my interpreter was there. There was us and a truck flatbed with all kinds of young ladies, and a car pulled up. My interpreter backs in the shadows and gets against the wall like this, and everybody's freaking out. And I'm going, why? And the people in the car asked a question in perfect English. Do you know where a gas station is? So I walked up to the car and I spoke to him and talked to him for quite a while. And suddenly, out of nowhere comes the men of the village that had gone with us and their police. They burnt rubber and took off. And our interpreter says, how could you do that? And I said, what are you talking about? I said, I just told them what they wanted to know. They want to know how to get together. No, they had guns pointed at you and at us. They were going to take the girls. They would have killed us. How could you do that? And keep them talking till their help arrived. And I thought, I did. So that night I slept in fear that they would come back. Yet, Satan comes in like a roaring lion, and God comes and knocks him to the side. I must end here now. I'm not able to bring us up much closer. So, that was basically our first missionary journey. We had many more and much more excitement than all of that. But God gave me a name. Years ago, he told me to wear gray. I wore it for years, going from church to church, and I call myself the Gray Man. That's one of my names. And when he gave me this dream, it was so cute. I had a dream. I was in a field working, and there were people working these fields all around me. Okay. I looked up and I saw a mountain off in the distance, and I knew I wanted to go there. But I had to go through a swamp, and I had two sides to go. There's a big rock in the center. I could go the right or the left, and I chose the left, and I almost died in that swamp. Then I got to the mountain, and out of nowhere, this man walks out with his bunch of robes and that. And I was thinking, you see, as I started up the mountain, it was cold. And he walked out and he said, can I give you a robe for the journey? And I looked at the robes and I says, do you have one with gray in it? And he laughs and he laughs. He says, will this one do? And I put it on, and he walked with me up the mountain. So to bring this all to close is to say, I have lived and walked with our Savior. I have both almost died spiritually, and yet I am here today. I am his to do with as he wants. Hannah Hurnard's book, The Hearing Heart, and I'll go over a couple moments, is a book you need to read if you haven't, and you need to devour it. I'll give you a brief little thing. When I pray, I ask this, Hannah Hurnard's book, The Hearing Heart. When I pray, Lord, I want to hear, create within me a hearing and obedient heart. And I mean it, and I pray with intensity. And if you look at me, you'll see I'm tense. I pray with intensity. I bind my thoughts, and I acknowledge my death. I die to self, and I bind the enemy from speaking to me. And then I say, please speak to me. Father, please speak to me and tell me what you have to say for me. And in the beginning, I used to write it down. One last short story, and then we're done. When we were in Fresno, California, Bethany and I used to go to a German restaurant in the mountains in San Bernardino. Believe it or not, there's mountains that get snow on them out there. And we would go to this restaurant. You had to wear a suit and a tie. And they would sometimes, if it wasn't done right, they'd cut it off of you. It was fun. It was enjoyable. It was just a big game, but some of the best food we'd ever had. And so we would turn around and pray and feel we got yes all the time, right? We had prayed this prayer. We had sought God's voice. And Elijah heard it as a still small. That means there's no words, loud words, though I hear him loud at times and sometimes not. If you ever look back at my stories, count the number of times I've died or should have died. Count the number of times in relationship to that. But so we had been praying, and this time we turned around and prayed, and we got no, just a clear no.
And
And
what we were doing is asking his permission. Can we go out to this?
and
restaurant?
actually, I got dressed up in my suit and tie and started to walk out the door. And Bethany says, honey, we got to ask if we can go. So we did and got no. So I rebuked the devil, bound him, and we asked again. And I got no again. So I rebuked the devil again and tried to bind him again. And we went back to prayer because I was convinced God would not say no. Well, short while later, we heard in the radio about a massive landslide on the road leading up to that restaurant, and cars had been destroyed. People had been injured, and there's a traffic jam, and people would be there for hours. So I write down and have in the past, nowadays I don't so much, what I think he said to see if it comes to pass. He does not contradict his book. Remember that. But to see what he has to say. We can trust him. And so I recommend that strongly. And now we're going to close in prayer. And I believe Daniel will close us in prayer.
Father, we thank you and we praise you that you are King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We thank you for this opportunity to take a look at the life that Verrie has led and the ways that you have worked in it. And the ways you have spoken in it, into his life and into his heart, Father. And we just thank you for that. And thank you for the continued journey that you have before us. And thank you for our time. In Hashem Yeshua HaMashiach, I pray.
Amen.
Give it a second.
If I could get a pencil.